Okay, well, it's been a heck of a day. For those of you who were trying to follow before, I feel terrible. I'm so sorry that it didn't work. Everything just crashed and burned. So what can you do? We make plans, and God tends to laugh because he's a funny guy. So I figured the least I can do is hop on again and share a little bit about the day. And as I can see, thank God there are many people who are still celebrating Tisha B'Av, and they would like to know some things. So since I'm not talking to a live audience, this is just you and me at the computer. If you have any points of clarification, any questions, anything, any comments about what we're about to discuss, feel free to just type it right in, and hopefully I'll be able to answer you in real time. So I mentioned that I wanted to speak about Tisha B'Av's misconceptions, and I think that the most deep one, the most fundamental one, the one that everybody for some reason seems to maintain as conventional wisdom, is that we Katie, you're in South Africa, so you definitely don't have to start your fast over. It's like Thursday over there. I think the biggest misconception about Tisha B'Av is that we are fasting on Tisha B'Av, and in fact, we're mourning on Tisha B'Av because that's the day that the temple was destroyed. And if you ask someone who's just like a tiny little bit more sophisticated than that, he'll tell you that not only was the temple destroyed on Tisha B'Av, but in fact, both temples were destroyed on Tisha B'Av, 400 and 500 years in between the destruction of the first and the destruction of the second. And that's why we're mourning. We're so sad that the temples were destroyed. This is not true. This is just not true. I'm not saying it's not true that the temples were destroyed on Tisha B'Av. That is true. That is historically accurate. But that's not why we're fasting. You see, if that were true, then we'd be mourning on Tisha B'Av because the temples were destroyed, and that's not how it works. The temples were destroyed because of Tisha B'Av, because Tisha B'Av precedes the destruction of the temple by hundreds and hundreds of years. How do I know this? Because if you read in the Torah, when the Jews are in the desert, after Moshe comes and takes them out of the land of Egypt, and he brings them into the desert, and they send spies. They're supposed to go into Israel right away. There was never supposed to be any of this, 40 years wandering around until everybody dies. That was not supposed to be that way. And they sent spies. They sent 12 spies into the land of Israel, and the spies came back and they told the Jews, they're like, look, the land is good. It's a great land. The problem is there are giants living there, and these giants are they're terrifying. they're absolutely terrifying. Imagine, you think to yourself, well, I don't believe in giants, right? Giants are for Harry Potter. Hagrid isn't real. Let me tell you something. It's real, okay? If you've ever sat courtside in an NBA game and you watched Shaquille O'Neal run by you, now let me tell you something. I'm from Miami, and I've run into Shaq a few times actually in my childhood. Which he's a wonderful guy. He's very, very nice, very sweet, very polite. The whole like shalom, my brother thing when you would see him next to the yeshiva at Walgreens on 20th. Here's the thing. That's because he's your friend. If you had to fight a guy that was the size of Shaquille O'Neal with a knife, that guy's 7'2", 380 pounds. He's holding a 9-foot broadsword. Like, it's terrifying. I understand why the spies were terrified, so I'm not going to judge them and say that I wouldn't have been wimpy at the time. I probably would have gone to pieces also. But the point is, historically, this is what happened. The people cried that night. They cried that night. They said, God is taking us out of Egypt so we can all die in the desert. We're going to get slaughtered by these massive giant people. And all of our children are going to be killed, and our women are going to be ravaged, and all our stuff is going to be taken, and our anything that remains is going to be burned. It's terrible. And they cried, and they cried, and they cried. And the Talmud tells us in the Masechet Sotah that night was Tisha B'Av. That night was Tisha B'Av. And Hashem said, Atem b'chitem b'chiyah shel chinam, af ani ekva lachem b'chiyah dorot, which means you cried for no reason. I will give you a reason to cry. But you understand that particular year's Tisha B'Av was 500 or 600 years before the first temple was even built, let alone destroyed. So it can't be that you're mourning the temples. It must be that the temples are destroyed on Tisha B'Av. On Tisha B'Av. The temples are destroyed on Tisha B'Av because of the power of the day that the day represents. Tisha B'Av represents something beyond the temple. Now, I think this might come actually as a point of solace to you, because many Jews, obviously most Jews overwhelmingly don't celebrate Tisha B'Av, but even the ones who do, specifically the ones who do, they struggle mightily to understand what it is that they're supposed to be mourning. Like, I don't really feel the relevance of this temple thing. I don't live in a world that's temple-centric. Nobody that I know practices that sort of cultic worship. In fact, nobody I've ever met anybody who did, most probably. So it's hard, it's hard to relate to mourning over this temple, but that's good. It turns out you're not supposed to be mourning over the temple, so don't worry. That was not the problem. That was the problem. Well, then you sit there, and again, this is how I heard about it in yeshiva. We say, well, we mourn the fact that we know that we don't really appreciate what the temple was. I mean, if that's helpful to you, if that's meaningful to you, and that makes you feel spiritual, then you go do your thing. So as I mentioned earlier today, for those who were there live, maybe you're mourning the fact that you don't have a very close relationship with God. I don't think that's what Tisha B'Av's about. And also, I don't meet many people often who find that they don't have enough of a relationship with God. After all, He never calls back. I see people who say that they want to develop their relationship better with their spouse or with their kids or with their business manager or with their friends or with themselves. But I don't often see people who want to, who feel like they should mourn over their deficient relationship with the Almighty. That's not something that comes up very, very often. Well, if we're not mourning the building and we're not mourning our relationship with God, then what are we mourning? Why are we sitting low today? Why am I so hungry? Why am I so hungry, man? And even more than hungry, why am I so thirsty? Like hungry, okay, I think we all know I can stand to lose a few lbs, but the thirst thing, man, that's rough. That's hurting me. So why am I doing this? Like, what's the point? Oh, yeah, Giddy, that's a great question. See, I'm so happy that we're doing it in this forum. Giddy's like, 1 second. When God says, I'll give you a reason to cry, doesn't that sound a little bit like childish? He's like, well, you didn't listen to me, so now nanny boo-boo. That's a great question. I love it. The answer is as follows. When God says, you cried for no reason, I will give you a reason to cry, it means that this is going to fix your problem. It's not a punishment. It's not punitive. It is actually a tool to fix what was broken. And we're going to discuss what exactly that means and why that's true. So I want to read for you a little bit from the book of Jeremiah. The book of Yirmiyahu it's so sad. The whole book is really, really sad because it talks about the destruction. And it turns out that God says to Yirmiyahu, tell everybody that the king Tzidkiyahu, the king of Judah, is going to get destroyed by the king Nebuchadnezzar. Why is this state because of the spies? That's a good question, Randy. So that obviously means that the sin of the golden calf was not a sin that would keep them out of Israel, but for some reason the sin of the spies did keep them out of Israel, and we'll discuss why that is. So it says that Yirmiyahu prophesizes to the whole city that it's going to get destroyed. Everyone is going to be exiled, and it's going to be massacres in the streets. The women are going to be ravaged. The children are going to be sold to slavery. They're going to torch your cities to the ground. There will not be a brick standing on top of another brick. Now, it's funny because if you're Jewish, you get this picture. You totally get this picture. Like if you would describe the destruction of an ancient biblical city to your typical Tom, Dick, and Harry in the street, I don't think they would have much of an appreciation for that sort of thing. Like it's a world that doesn't exist anymore. But here's the thing. Every single Jew on the planet Earth, when you start talking to him about the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, or the destruction of Beitar, or the destruction of Masada, I mean, he's hearing Khmelnytsky pogroms. He's hearing riots. He's hearing crusades. He's seeing this. Like every Jew reads this and he's like, yeah, that's like last Tuesday and hopefully not next Tuesday. Yeah. Jews really, really connect with this. And then in the middle of this prophecy that God is sending to Yirmiyahu about the destruction of all of Judea, all the Jews are going to get wrecked and thrown out. It's going to be an unspeakable tragedy. You know what he starts telling him in the middle? You know what God starts telling Yirmiyahu in the middle of the vision? I mean, it's literally funny. It's laughable. He says to him, oh, by the way, your uncle Chanamel, Uncle Chani's going to come over. He's fallen on some hard times. He's fallen on some hard financial times, your Uncle Chanamel ben Shalom. And he was forced to sell his ancestral field. So he's going to come to you and he's going to ask you if you want to buy it back, if you want to redeem the field for him. Now, there is this concept in Judaism, it's in the Torah, that we all have ancestral fields. Each and every single Jew has a field in their family that is connected with their family and connects them to the land of Israel. And if for whatever reason, God forbid, a person falls on hard financial times, someone, their brother, their uncle, their cousin, can bring that back, that he can buy back that land into the family so that it remains the legacy of that same family. And sure enough, as God is telling this to Yirmiyahu in the middle of his prophecy about the destruction of everything Jewish, there's a knock at the door, and there's Uncle Chani. And he's like, hey, listen, Jerry, I lost my business and I was forced to sell the field, and you can buy it back. So sure enough, Yirmiyahu does exactly what God told him to do because he's a good Jewish boy and that's what prophets do. And he does everything absolutely by the book. And God says, take this contract and fold it up and make sure there's witnesses on it and that it's notarized and that the court puts on its imprimatur and then put it inside the vault so that it can last a long time. And Yirmiyahu looks to God. Yirmiyahu says, Aha Adonai Elohim, which is just like WT heck. What's going on here? This is the question of Yirmiyahu to God. He says, God, you're telling me to make the world's worst business deal. Like historically, it's the world's worst business deal. You're in the middle of saying to me that everything's going to get burnt down. You're telling me that I should buy the World Trade Center from who was it? Sanders, whatever. You want me to buy it from Sanders on the 9th of September 2001? Like, that's a really, really terrible time to make an investment in the World Trade Center, wouldn't you think? The whole thing's going to come crashing down. Why are you telling me to buy back my cousin's field when I know that it's going to get plowed by the Babylonians? Crazy. That's what he says to God. That's what Yirmiyahu doesn't understand. But see, it's interesting because there's another problem. It's not just, hey, God, why are you telling me to buy the field? It's contextual. There's a contextual problem. Why in this book that I am reading, in case you think that I'm making this up, why in this book is the same prophecy used to tell Yirmiyahu about the destruction of the land and the fact that he should go buy his uncle's field? These seems to be like two different things. One is sort of like a private family issue, and the other is a national issue. Why are you telling Yirmiyahu national issues and then telling him that he should go buy back his cousin's field? Unless that in the destruction is the future. In the moment of the destruction is the beginning, the first step of the building. We don't look at the destruction of the temple or even the destruction of Jerusalem and Israel. We don't look at it as the end. It's not an end. It's a beginning. Now, if this is true, then hear what God is saying now. God says to Yirmiyahu, everything's going to be destroyed, decimated, eradicated, gone. And by the way, go buy that land. Go buy that land and do it by the book and take the scroll and put it in a vault. That's what he tells him. He says, put it in a vault, leman yamdu yamim rabim, so that it will last a long time. Why does it have to last such a long time? Well, because God knows what's coming, right? God knows that you're not going to be buying land in Israel for 2,000 years. That's a long time. And God tells Yirmiyahu, before the destruction starts, I want you to buy that field and I want you to stick that deed in the vault. Because that's what we're doing. We're destroying it so that it can be built up. And God finishes his response to Yirmiyahu by saying to him, Sadot ba'kesef yiknu, despite the fact that everything is going to get destroyed by the Babylonians, and then afterwards, subsequently, the second temple by the Romans. Despite that, Sadot ba'kesef yiknu, fields will once again be bought for money in Israel. There's going to be a totally revamped real estate business there. It's going to be huge. And they will be stamped by the courts, and they will be witnessed. The Eretz Binyamin, in the land of Benjamin, Ubesvive Yerushalayim, and surrounding Jerusalem, Uve'arei Yehuda, and in the cities of Judea, Uve'arei Hahar, and in the cities surrounding the mountains, Uve'arei HaShephelah, Uve'arei HaNegev, Yashiva Shvutam Ne'um Adonai, because I will return them. Meaning when God, in the very same sentence, is telling Yirmiyahu, hey man, I'm looking at this, and I'm telling you I'm going to destroy all of it, I want you to know that this is not a permanent destruction. This is the cutting out of a cancer. I am going to make them greater and more plentiful and more successful and more secure in the land of Israel. But make sure that you put it away in a vault that can last Yamim Rabim, a whole lot of days, man. Love you too, David. Better stay a whole lot of days because you're going to have 2,000 years of days while you're waiting to go back. But you see something fascinating here. You see that within the destruction are the seeds of the rebuilding. Well, this is not the only place that you see that. You see it throughout the idea of Tisha B'Av. For example, there's a very interesting medrash that says that Mashiach is born on Tisha B'Av. Oh, sounds like really cool. You know, it's very poetic. That it's almost like saying that the Savior of America will be born on July 4th, right? So the Savior of the Jews is born on Tisha B'Av. Okay, No. That's not what it's saying. What it's saying is that it doesn't have to be born on Tisha B'Av. He could be born in the middle of November. He could be a Thanksgiving baby. The point is that Mashiach literally is born on Tisha B'Av. The redemption begins on the day of the destruction. That's the beginning of the redemption, don't you see? It's all about knocking things down which are future so that we can build something glorious, something that's better. Because all that remained was a facsimile of its former self. It was a shell. It was a despicable building. God looked at the temple. He didn't see a temple. He saw a pagan worship. He saw a despicable, gross altar is what he saw. That's what he saw. Because it's not about the mechanics, right? It's never about, oh, do this here and put that there and say these magic words. No, it's about how you live. But we'll come to that soon. So within the destruction is the redemption. Here's another example of that idea. We don't say Tachanun today because, it says in the verse, Kara Alai Moed, that Tisha B'Av is called a Moed. Moed is a holiday, so we call it a holiday. Really, you call it a holiday? So people will tell you, well, you know what they mean by saying that Tisha B'Av is a holiday is because one day the temple will be rebuilt, and then we'll no longer need to fast on Tisha B'Av because we'll have a temple, and therefore we're going to make it into a holiday. No. No. If that were true, then you wouldn't need to fast anymore on Tisha B'Av. That I understand. If the temple is built, then I don't need to fast on Tisha B'Av. That's not a reason to make Tisha B'Av into a holiday. It just means that there's no reason to fast on Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av becomes, Tuesday. It's not a significant day. It's a benign day. It's not a holiday. When it says in Megillat Eicha that Tisha B'Av is a moed, it's a holiday, you know what it means? It means it's a holiday. It's a bloody holiday. Now, today, right now. Why is it a holiday? Because it's the beginning of the redemption, don't you see? It's the beginning of the fixing of all the problems that the Jews have. Don't you see that when you look at the destruction, at the cinders, at the smoldering ruin? You don't see that? I mean, this is exactly what Rabbi Akiva was talking about with his friends in the Gemara and at the very end of Makot. When they're crying, and he's laughing. He goes, when I look at the destruction, I don't see the destruction. All I see is the redemption. All I see is the future. Well, what is it then? What is it then that we're really mourning if it's not the building? Then what are we mourning? So you go back to the source. The source of Tisha B'Av, as we mentioned before, is not the destruction of the temple. It's the spies refusing to go into the land of Israel. It's our choice not to go into the land that kicks us out of the land. Is that so crazy? Is that so strange? You refused to go in. Okay. Stay out. Stay in exile. Now, this is not a geographical issue. It's not that the Jews have to be in their magical spot. The point is that Judaism is a fully integrated vision of how society is supposed to act, from a tiny micro-individual level, all the way through the spouse, through the children and the family making the home, through the community, through the state, through the nation, through the world. That's how the Torah works. That's how the Torah is structured. We're trying to create this perfection in the world. That's what we're going for. But you see, you can't do that if you don't have political autonomy, if you don't have a national identity. If you're not together, you can't have that. Well, why not? I could be a very good Jew in Brooklyn, New York. In fact, we've had some very, very great Jews in Brooklyn, New York. We've all heard of them. We have pictures of them on the wall. Why do you have to be in Israel for something like that? Obviously, to be a great tzaddik, to be a very holy person, you don't have to live in Israel. But if you want to have a perfect society, you have to have your own land. You have to have political autonomy because there are economic ramifications and there are military ramifications and there are governmental implications and there are societal implications. It's not all about doing all of your little mitzvot while you sit there in your tiny little community. We have to be top to bottom an integrated and aligned society. All of us. And to do that, we need political autonomy, which is why the Torah gives you governmental systems. And it tells you the rules of waging war. And it tells you all sorts of economic rules. And it tells you laws about torts. Why? Why isn't it just, you have to wave a lulav like this and make sure you pray every day with a lot of intent and use this kind of an etrog? Like, why would the Torah give me laws about what happens if some guy bumps into another guy in his Apple cart? The answer is because that's what the Torah's all about. It's not some religion. It's not a religious book. It's not about that. It's not about mechanics. It's not about crossing off, all the various criteria that you have to do to be a holy person. That's what it is. Go build a great society. The Talmud tells us, do you know why it fell? Do you know why Israel fell? Do you know why the temple was burned? Because they fell apart as a society. They fell apart. And they fell apart on two levels. One level was moral. That's true. It said they committed adultery. And because they committed adultery, they got raped. And because they didn't released their slaves, they were enslaved. And because they committed corruption and thievery, they lost their money. Everything was a result of the things that they themselves did. I say they, I mean we. We messed up. We made mistakes. We chose not to live properly. Okay. Then you burn it down. Yeah, so Yochi, it's a tool. The reason that we don't greet people is just a tool to get you in the proper headspace. It's not essential. It's not an essential property today. It's a tool to be in the right headspace. So what we lost was our national autonomy. Now listen for a moment to what the rabbi said. The rabbi said in the Talmud that anybody who does not mourn for Jerusalem will not see its rebuilding. And anyone who does mourn for Jerusalem will merit to see its rebuilding. That's not me, man. That's the Talmud. The Talmud actually says that. Do you believe it? Do you buy it? Do you think it's true? I mean, did Rav Aaron Kotler mourn for Jerusalem? Did Rashi mourn for Jerusalem? Did Rashi get to see the temple rebuilt? Obviously not. So you'd be like, oh, well, it must be like after the resurrection of the dead kind of thing. The rabbis are talking about, esoteric, metaphysical, blah, 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 blah. Again, I ask you, when the rabbis say anyone who mourns for Israel will get to see it rebuilt, and anyone who does not will not, is it a prayer? Is it a curse? Is it advice? I'll tell you what it is. They're teaching you something. They're communicating an idea to you, and the idea is so patently obvious. It is self-evidently true. Here's what the rabbis are saying to you. They're saying, what we're mourning is the fact that we're not a nation, because we were all taken out of our place and thrown to the four corners of the world. And there was no email, there was no connection, there were no cell phones. So they said anybody who sits and mourns that we're not a nation. Think about it. Anyone who around the world with no connection to each other is sitting around and mourning the fact that we don't have an autonomous nation. That person will merit to see the reconstruction. Well, why? Why is that true? Isn't that obvious? The Jews who were exiled to Babylonia or to Iran or to Moldavia, it doesn't matter where. The Jews who were exiled wherever they were exiled, who didn't sit down and mourn that we're not a nation, guess what happened to them and their descendants? Gone! They're now Irish. They're now Canadian. They're now whatever they are, wherever they went. You know what they're not? Not part of the nation, are they? Because think about it. Listen to the words. It's so cool. Anyone who sits down and mourns that we're not a nation is part of a nation, isn't he? Because what makes you a nation is that you're all thinking about being together. You're all seeing yourself as one unit. So if the Jew in Greece and in Salonika, and the Jew in Baghdad, and the Jew in Chicago, and the Jew in Tunisia, if all of those Jews on the same day sit down and say, I wish we were together so that we could get everything aligned properly and fix the world. And it's such a shame that we're not. And the reason that we're not is because I'm not perfect. Well, then you're a nation, aren't you? Because you're all thinking of each other. You're all thinking about this national idea, which gives you the identity, which makes it real. The guy that goes along his merry way today, goes to the shopping mall and doesn't know that it's Tisha B'Av. I pity that person. And again, there's nothing personal. I don't feel any animosity towards them whatsoever, but it's so sad. It's so sad, don't you see? Because if it doesn't hurt you, if it doesn't bother you that we're not part of an autonomous nation, then what you're saying is, it doesn't bother you that you're not part of an autonomous nation. You've chosen a different nation. You've given up that identity. That is not your national identity. Okay? That will show out in your children and your descendants. We all know this. I know you're not supposed to say it. It doesn't sound nice, but it's true. And yeah, it's true. So that's what the rabbis meant when they say that anybody who mourns for Jerusalem will eventually merit to see it. Maybe not them, but their great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren will see it. And anyone who doesn't won't. And what is it that we're mourning? Once again, we're mourning the lack of nationhood. The temple is only a symbol of the nation. That's all it is. That's all it is. It's just a building. The fact that we're not together is the fact that matters. And if you look in that very same chapter in Jeremiah, before God told him about buying that piece of land, as we said, that within the ashes, like a phoenix will arise. Before that, when God was explaining his anger at the Jewish people, I want you to listen to what he says. He says as follows: if the Jews leave from these laws, if they leave the way that they're supposed to react in their society, also the Jews will cease to be a nation before me all the days. All what days? All the days that we've been sitting here for 2,000 years. That's many days. 2,000 years of days you will sit as not a nation. And in fact, Jews did not think of themselves as a nation. They thought of themselves as a religion, which was a horrible problem. But thank God Hitler solved that for us. That's a different schmooze for a different day. It turns out we are a nation. And God says, you will cease to be a nation because some of you will be here and some of you will be there and some of you will be there and you'll be scattered for thousands of years and you'll have nothing to do with each other. But behold, days are coming, says God, it will be rebuilt. It will be rebuilt. Again, in the very same paragraph as the destruction comes the rebuilding. We're destroyed because we had to be. We've got problems. We've got real problems. Everyone likes to talk about Sinas Chinam. You're welcome back. Everybody likes to talk about Sinas Chinam. I'm not saying it's not a problem. It is a problem. But I think there's a more fundamental problem, which goes back all the way to the primal spies. We don't want to be an autonomous nation. I don't want to have to deal with you. I would rather do my thing. I would much rather live in Miami Beach, Florida, where I have a secular government. Frankly, I'm a libertarian politically, and I can vote the way that I want, and I can go where I like and do what I like. And by the way, if you're my neighbor, whether or not you're Jewish, the things that you do in your backyard, provided that they don't wake me up, I don't care. Good for you. Good for you. I don't experience this deep desire to grab all my Jewish brethren and go make the desert bloom. That's the problem. That's the problem. It's not just that, we hate each other. It's that we don't feel like there is an us. We don't feel like there's an us at all. Say, how many Jews do I hate? Oh, I can't think of it. How many Jews do I not think about at all? Many. There are so many Jews that I never think about. We were talking a little bit earlier how, let's pretend for a moment that 30% of Jews celebrate Tisha B'Av, which, by the way, they obviously don't. But let's pretend for a moment that 30% of Jews actually celebrate Tisha B'Av. 70% of Jews definitely don't celebrate Tisha B'Av. They're not aware. Do you care? Do you care? So I don't hate them. I don't believe that Jews hate them. What, you hate them? I hate the Jew that's not keeping Yom Kippur. I hate the Jew that doesn't keep Sukkot. I hate the Jew that's... I hate them. Why would I hate them? It's ridiculous. I'll do my thing. He'll do his thing. He doesn't like doing it, and I like doing it. Yeah, but don't you listen to what God is telling you? You're one unit. You're one unit. You're one nation. And the second you say that you're an island, then you will worship Levitically in your own way, and you can have a beautiful lulav and a beautiful yeshiva and the longest sitters and the nicest beard and the coolest borsalino and the best school for your kids. But at the end of the day, if 70% of the Jews are people that you feel totally disconnected from, then you have no nation. You're a bunch of little people that live in the desert together, and you live in the same place, and you hang out with your friends in your own little gated community, and Shalom Yisrael. That is not the point. It's just not. So we're doing an awful job. Excellent question. Joanna wants to know if having Israel without a temple makes us a nation. The answer is no, because even having the temple doesn't make us a nation. How do I know this? Because one of the exiles is called Galut Yavan, the exile of Greece. And when we were in the exile of Greece, we actually did have a temple in the land of Israel, and it was still considered an exile because we didn't have political autonomy. Remember, if the point of us being here in this world is to fix the world, and in order to fix the world, you have to be fixed on a micro and a macro level. The individual has to be perfectly aligned, and the society has to be perfectly aligned. If both of those things are true, for that to happen, you need an entire system, which is why no one Jew can do all 613 mitzvahs, right? Everybody knows that. There are mitzvahs that only apply to men and mitzvahs that only apply to women. There are mitzvahs that only apply to Kohanim and to the Levim and to Yisraelim. There are mitzvahs that only apply to the king and only apply to Kohen Gadol and only apply to the Mashuach Milchama and only apply to the Skan. How can it be that we have all these things? Aren't I supposed to keep the 613 mitzvahs? The answer is no. You're not. You can't. There aren't 613 mitzvahs for you, the individual. There's 613 mitzvahs for you, the collective, because Israel is a national entity. And a nation is made up of many individuals. In order for that nation to act properly, the individuals have to act properly and the collective has to act properly. And the second we cut ourselves off from the collective, then you've become a religion and not a nation. And that's a problem. That's a massive, massive problem. That was the problem of the Meraglim. They didn't want to be a nation. They didn't want to go in. It's horrific on the one hand. But on the other hand, I mean, like when I read this, I'm like, this book is very old. Even if you're a biblical critic, you still admit that the book of Jeremiah is like 2,500 years old. What does it say in that book? I mean, thanks, Phil. Like, in this book, it says to you, I'm going to destroy it in such a way that only Jews know what we mean when we say destruction, man. We know what we mean. We mean the ovens. We mean rivers of blood. We mean countless tears. Infinite sorrow. We know what we mean. And only a book like this, a 2,500-year-old book, says in the exact same paragraph, I'm going to destroy you and plow you under, and no one will hear, hide nor harry you, and you won't be a nation for many, many, many days. And by the way, you'll come back and you'll have a booming market and you'll be bigger and stronger and better and more secure than ever before. And it happened. And it happened. You're going to look me in the face and you're going to tell me it didn't happen? Tell me that it's like Ben Gurion said, right? A Jew who doesn't believe in miracles is not a realist. What Jew doesn't believe in miracles? It's ridiculous. It's absurd to not believe in miracles. Like, we see them all the time. They're not always pleasant, unfortunately. Some of the miracles are like the most horrific things you've ever seen in your life. The Holocaust was a miracle, obviously. It was a terrible miracle. It's a miracle, and it makes it pretty obvious about what's what in the world. So, what do we do now? What do we do now? Now that we know this. Make Israel great again. You'll sell them in the blue and white, Gideon, instead of the red. Maybe we'll, yeah. If you can get the Krishners to wear one, that would probably do wonders for your brand. So what now? What do we do now? I think that the first step is very, very simple. We have to start actually wanting. We have to want to have that nation. We have to want to live that kind of a life. And again, when I say that kind of a life, I'm not talking about payas and mezuzahs. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about eradicating poverty in your community. I'm talking about eradicating social problems in your community. I'm talking about eradicating adultery in your community. I'm talking about eradicating infighting in your community. I'm talking about eradicating anger and cruelty and impatience from your household. I'm talking about driving bad character traits from your brain. That's what we mean. That's what we mean. When our book of Lamentations is called Eicha, which means how. We're not sitting there like in Holocaust Memorial. And I mentioned before, Yad Vashem, I love Yad Vashem. Yad Vashem is a very important endeavor. So important. Here's the thing. Eicha and Yad Vashem are very different things. Yad Vashem wants you to understand the magnitude of the tragedy. It wants to show you things that are unimaginable. And if it didn't show you, you would never, ever believe that humans could perpetrate this on each other. You would never believe it. So they recorded that for posterity and they showed it to you. And there are still people that deny it. Fine. But it serves a purpose. In the Jewish books, in Tanakh, in Yirmiyahu, in Eicha, we're not asking, we don't care to show you pictures of corpses and emaciated people in Auschwitz behind barbed wire fences. That's not what we're there to do. Yirmiyahu just wants to know, how is this possible that this happens? I don't understand. How could this happen to us? He's not saying, how could those people hate us so much that they would want to kill us? That's not a question. They're high-fiving as they're killing us. They're laughing as they try to catch the babies on the bayonets. They play baby tossing. That's not the question that Yirmiyahu asks. Yirmiyahu asks, how did this happen to us? How did we let ourselves dissolve so deeply? How did we let ourselves become so morally decrepit? How did we let all of our systems fall apart so that we fell to barbarians? How can this be? That's what Eicha is. That's our lamentation book. We're like, how did we do this? And what is the Torah's answer? And the Talmud talks about all the time. Well, you know why? Because this and this and this and this and this. And they're talking about really earthy things. They're talking about political corruption. And they're talking about misusing the judiciary. And they're talking about not being nice to each other and having social problems in the streets. You think that you can have your 15 little friends in your kiddish club and you're not gonna have a society fall apart because the people who aren't allowed in your kiddish club? The first step is we have to start looking inward and outward. We got to fix me, and I got to have a connection to you. If I admit that to myself, if I know that I'm not perfect, and I know that you matter and how you feel matters because we're part of one nation, then I think that we will see that the seeds of that begin on the recognition of the tragedy of Tisha B'Av. And in fact, we will see that the Beit HaMikdash, the third temple, grows out of precisely the spot where it was destroyed. Had a very, very meaningful and hopefully very, very easy fast. And God willing, next year when we live stream this, we'll be doing it from the Temple Mount, baby. Much love.